I'm not exactly thrilled about this new phase of his.
Well, I think you underestimate him. That kid knows what he wants.
No, he doesn't.
Is it true that you knock someone out?
Please, Baker. Please.
Think about it. No one saw it. No one's going to believe you, even if you do tell them. People are just going to call you a liar.
But you could tell them I'm not.
Well, I could, but then they just say I'm protecting you.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 266. Releasing in Australian cinemas today, the 5th of December, is Kairos, an independent drama that stars Chris Bunton as Danny, a high-achieving gymnast who wants to transition to boxing. Danny also happens to have Down syndrome, a condition that he will not allow to restrict his life no matter the consequences. A drama about identity, manhood and ego, Kairos is also a rare film that features characters and actors with Down syndrome in key roles. Joining me now to talk about Kairos is the film's writer and director, Paul Barakat. Paul, I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
Well, look, today is the release date, and this is a movie that, from conception to now, is what, 3 years in the making? So how does it feel? More, maybe?
Yeah, it's been a lot more for me. Production-wise, yeah, about 3, but from the time I started developing, it's probably moving on to about 5 and a bit now. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And I guess like you have shown the film at festivals, both here and abroad, but today the wider public finally gets to see it. What's that feeling like that now, after all this time, your movie's out there?
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. As an independent filmmaker working in this country, I guess working in the industry in general, to have the film, have a cinema release, which is just like a bit of a miracle. I mean, I know I see a lot of films these days streaming, and so for us to get a cinema release in Australia was a pretty amazing achievement that we're really proud of.
When I talk to filmmakers and they tell me about the inspirations behind the films, there's so many different stories and different things that happened in their life. With yourself, in regard to the origin of this movie, it has to do with a specific memory you had as a child. Could you share that memory with our listeners?
Yes. So when I was 8 years old, my parents, in their infinite wisdom, decided to take us to Lebanon, which was at the height of a civil war. And the reason is that they wanted us to. Well, Dad had never been there. And it was just kind of like, let's go and sort of see the family, see the family, which we've never met. And it was an amazing experience in more ways than one. And while I was there, I met a cousin who had suffered brain damage when she had a childhood accident. So she was quite a lot older than me at the time, but had sustained this brain damage as a result of that accident. And, she was just trying to play with us, basically, just trying to play with the kids. And I noticed the atmosphere around us change dramatically. Yeah. And the adults and the community in general, there was this sort of, a kind of a fear, you could say. And I think that's a feeling that, and a memory that had troubled me for a long time since that moment. And I noticed the behaviour of adults around people with intellectual disabilities to be quite similar everywhere I went, because we travelled to America after that, and I kind of saw her a few times there. And then again in Australia, growing up, I noticed it quite often as well. People would just sort of, they didn't know how to communicate or how to handle people, how to handle a conversation or talk to someone with intellectual disability. So I guess I've tried to explore that on some level in my work in the past through short films and whatnot, but nothing as successfully as this particular film, where I said, I've noticed that there's been a huge lack of meaningful representation for people with intellectual disabilities in the media, and I just wanted to try and change that, I guess.
In regards to Kairos, how does that memory transition to the story people are going to see on screen today and onwards? Does it have to do, are you tapping into the fear aspect of it? Are you tapping into the disability aspect? Is it all of it put together? What exactly are you taking from that memory and applying to your story?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it probably more or less relates to the character of John, played wonderfully by Jerome Pride.
Yep.
He I don't want to spoil anything, but he kind of recounts a memory that's very similar to my childhood memory, and in a different way, obviously dramatized. But that's kind of the catalyst for him, taking Danny under his wing in a way, and trying to, I guess, reconcile his memories from the past, and because what I've noticed is, for me, I think the catalyst from that memory is that a lot of people with intellectual disabilities are voiceless. They're kind of put away or hidden away from society, from the mainstream, and I just noticed that sort of relationship that people had over there to my cousin. I wanted to make sure that we give them a voice. So in a way, it's kind of giving my cousin a voice, and giving people with intellectual disabilities a voice on screen and meaningful representation. Yeah.
The film is self-funded, and it's very much a family affair. Your wife Carla and your brother Jonathan are producers. The decision to go your own way, I actually talk to a lot of Aussie independent filmmakers, and I find that a lot of them actually do that. They self-distribute. It could be from they couldn't get funding from the government bodies, or that they didn't want it in the first place, perhaps, as well. In regards to yourself, Paul, self-funding the film, is that something that you wanted to make sure that you had control over and didn't want to be, say, whim to any type of government body or such in regards to this story?
Look, I don't think that was initially a conscious decision. I had, a lot of experience through doing shorts and stuff like that over the years, and I felt like, well, let's go down that traditional route first and see what's possible. But we noticed, that if you didn't have an experienced executive producer with like 3 credits and all these other things, all these other boxes we had to tick, there was just no way we were going to get past that first stage. And I actually made some inquiries and phone calls, and just kind of advised that, our chances were slim if we didn't have, a reputable producer on board. And I kind of thought, well, even then, trying to get a reputable producer on board when you have a main character that has Down syndrome in your film is not an easy task as well. So they start saying, well, it's not commercial, it's not going to sell. And I was just getting frustrated. And my wife and I just said, you know what? Let's just put our money where our mouths are and make this thing. And I'm glad we went that route. But it wasn't in any sort of defiance. It was just more like, well, we have no other option. And I wasn't going to wait around 7 years before I got this film off the ground. So I just said, let's just do it. and I'm glad we did. I'm glad we kind of, went for it. And it definitely allowed us to have a lot more control over the story, because this is a rather confronting film in parts, and a challenging film that I think, I fear sometimes some of these stories tend to get sanitized when they go through the kind of rewriting process and stuff, and homogenized. And with a clear directive I was getting from particularly, the parents I was dealing with in the community was, do not patronize our son, make sure that you give him this meaningful, 3-dimensional role that, will test him as an actor. He is an actor after all. And I'm so glad I went that way. And just, we went for it. We didn't hold back in that sense. And Chris and the cast, they loved doing those scenes. They loved challenging themselves and each other. And I fear that going through a more traditional route might not have allowed us to explore it that fully. Yeah.
You also used crowdfunding, and again, talking to different filmmakers, there's been mixed stories in regards to that. The cool thing with your production, though, is that you actually had a real big story on the project like a year ago. And you had a chance to actually talk about the crowdfunding and the movie and Chris and all these different things. So when that happens, what kind of impact does that have on your production, all of a sudden are you getting more calls and more people more interested? Does the crowdfunding increase quite a bit? I mean, what's the impact of a story like that?
Yes and no. I mean, Lisa at Wilkinson was amazing. The fact that they took our story on and, really looked at Chris's life, because it is such an impressive story, Chris's story. It was a wonderful boost for the project, there's no doubt. But I do feel like, even then with crowdfunding, it's like an entire separate job. You really need like a full-time team to be running a crowdfunding platform, because while we were trying to make the film, no one had time to sort of keep up with social media and all these things. We had such a small crew, and so we kind of, we'd already put up about 95% of the budget in the end.
Yep.
And so that crowdfunding, even though it fell short a couple of times, it still helped us get over the line in the end with a little bit of extra funding that we needed, And I have to take my hat off to the community that got behind us. Just the public wanting to see this film, which was, really, I guess that's really rewarding as a director. You feel like, okay, well, people want to see this story, which is great. So there's an audience there, But it is. You really, I think, if you're going to go down that crowdfunding route as a director, as a filmmaker, bear in mind the amount of work it will take to get that off the ground. We were fortunate enough to go through the Australian Cultural Fund, who were really supportive. But if you're going to do sort of Indiegogo and all these sort of things, and you're giving away rewards, and people don't often factor in how much it costs to do those things, and then so we didn't really go down that path, because I knew I'd heard horror stories in the past of people just not having enough money to kind of give those rewards out in the end, and so we just kept it more simple and streamlined, and that kind of worked for us. But it's a tough one, it's a real tough one, I'd say. It's in terms of which route to go down as a filmmaker.
We mentioned Chris a couple of times now, and his background is impressive. Gold medalist in gymnastics, an actor as well, like you've said before. The first time I saw him was in Down Under, Abe Forsyth's movie from a couple of years ago. Is that the same time you saw him as well?
Yeah, so originally the plot involved... The plot of Kairos was originally like a subplot in another movie that I was writing. Where this Danny who pursues this boxing career, hurts. Basically an incident happens with the trainer, and it's all about that. But really, it was about a brother that discovers that he has a brother with Down syndrome, and that whole subplot takes over. When I saw Chris in Down Under at the Sydney Film Festival in 2016, I was like, oh my God, this guy's stealing every scene. I need to find this guy and find the community, some other members of the community, and transform the story a little bit here. And then after I met him through Ruckus, which is that they also appear in the film, they're a disability-led performance group, I realized that I needed to incorporate that wonderful group into the film, and it just worked perfectly with what I was trying to achieve. And it ended up that subplot became the main plot. Because Chris is just such a compelling actor. I just thought this is really what I'm going for here. The true meaning of why I was making this project became clear after my time with Ruckus.
There are scenes in the movie involving Danny where, say, he'll be on a train or in the boxing gym, etc., and then he'll encounter discrimination, whether intentional or not, towards his appearance, towards who he is as a person. When it comes to those kind of scenes, are they inspired by Chris himself and other members of the cast? Are they sharing stories like this to you, and then you are adding them to the screenplay to add a little further authenticity to the movie?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I wrote those scenes myself based on some of the conversations that I'd had with parents and with the individuals themselves. But it actually came in a weird way from my own experiences. I think I identify myself very strongly with Danny as an outsider in a way. And this film is about outsiders. It's really about how do we embrace who we truly are, how do we love ourselves and not have to prove ourselves to try and be anyone else in this community when all the world wants us to be is somebody else. I mean, I've got a Lebanese background. I grew up, I grew up in a fairly tolerant, community, but I did have my fair share of prejudice, and I did have particularly when major events were happening across the world that involved people of Middle Eastern appearance and background. That didn't help either. The train rides, the train looks. I still remember after those major events getting those looks on the train, and so I found a commonality between myself and a lot of the people that have disabilities who are just being looked at, purely judged on who they are in terms of physical appearance rather than who they are as people. And they're beautiful anyway, but it's just that I think society has such a misunderstanding of the community that they tend to sort of fear what they don't understand. And this film is the aim of this film is to sort of break down that stereotype and undermine the stereotype, I guess, of what it means to be a person with Down syndrome and have relationships and have friendships and have goals and dreams, because often they're not given that space in mainstream cinema.
The film, majority of the time, is set within a boxing gym. I attend a boxing gym myself, and they're really interesting places. And just like any other place, a lot of times it depends on the people, in this case, the owners or the trainers, the culture that they set within those places, how their fighters respond to any type of situation. And in the case of the character of John, who you said before, played by Jerome Pride, such a great job in it, how do you want people to take him as a character, as a person? Is he a bad man? Is he a sad man? Is it all up to interpretation? When you wrote that character, what was the thing that you wanted to share with him in particular? And especially in regards to the environment that he's in of the boxing gym, did it also have to do with ego? Because I found that ego and pride are two really big parts of the story, both on Danny's and John's part as well.
Exactly. You're right. Yeah, spot on with that. But I wanted to demonstrate that also Danny had an ego as well, and that was important because I didn't want to portray him as this sort of like perfect, angelic human being that was without flaws. And by and large, I also didn't want to. By the same token, I didn't want to portray John that way either. I just I don't see the world in black and white. I see the world as just basically grey, different shades of it, really. And John is not the best antagonists I think I've ever seen in film are the ones that do play with our expectations and challenge, how we feel about them and challenge our loyalties and our ideas about the world. They're not clear cut, archetypes. They've got contradictions within them. And that was really important for me, that John was a person that the audience both understood what he was going through, but also, at the same time, were troubled and concerned by some of the actions that he took. I think when you understand where characters come from, that empathy, it does, you start to play a bit of tug of war with the emotions, and that is the stuff that keeps us engaged as audiences, rather than sort of making it, okay, this is the bad guy and this is the good guy. Danny himself does things in the film that are questionable as well. And that was important, that they both are very similar men, really. They're kind of reflections of each other. And they both share similar problems that struggle with how they're perceived.
Kairos had its world premiere at the Tertio Millennio Film Festival in Rome, and this is an interesting film festival because this was sponsored by the Pontifical Council for Culture. It was born from an idea from Pope John Paul II. When you get an invite to attend something like that and to also do so well there as well, what's that reaction like to have your film premiere in Rome in the film festival that is practically backed by the Catholic Church? I mean, that's got to be something that hardly, I don't think I've had anyone that I spoke to had, even filmmakers of faith-based films haven't had that kind of spotlight put on them from the church in that way. What was that like for you to have that happen?
Yeah, it was a really surreal moment for me. We'd sent a rough cut early on to Venice, and it didn't have any music, or the colour wasn't finished, and there was some scenes, missing. And I just kind of wanted to gauge, the response first of all, to see whether or not we'd get into that. And I didn't hear anything. And then about a month later, one of the selectors from Venice called me and said, look, I saw your film. Obviously I loved it. It wasn't complete. Have you finished it? And I was like, yes. And he goes, I'd love if we could invite you to this thing that I run in organising Rome. Because he was responsible, I think, for giving out the Robert Bresson Award at Venice, which is about films that have a sort of spiritual component. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So we had to make a kind of decision there and then as to whether or not we'd participate in this. And it was actually an intercultural event. So they had people from all over the world come to judge these films that they selected, which dealt with, the human journey and the human spirit, basically. And Kairos, we managed to finish it by then. They ended up premiering it next to the Fontana di Trevi in the Sala Trevi, which is the Film Heritage Centre of Italy. Mm-hmm. And when you go downstairs, the cinema is basically surrounded by ruins, outside. And we're kind of it was the most bizarre moment. I remember just sitting there, in this ancient city, watching Kairos. And they loved it. They kind of were really enamored by the film and by the performances and very overwhelming emotional response. And they really understood what we were going for. And to get that sort of validation was really great and a very special moment in my life. Yeah, definitely. I don't think I ever dreamed of sort of ending up somewhere in the middle of Rome. Showing the film near some ruins. So it was an extraordinary experience, yeah.
I mean, the write-up that they gave you was just incredible, and just bear with me for a moment, I just want to share this with my listeners. So pretty much the film festival jury there in Rome said, Kairos undermines the stereotype of Down syndrome as a physical, mental, psychological, relational and social limit. But Kairos also shows us the different levels of love and friendship with all the distortions that human weakness brings with it. Finally, the film reveals to us how one can love one's neighbour only by loving oneself first. The true existential strength lies in the courage to be faithful to one's values and visions, to accept defeats and learn from them, in self-love that leads to evolve, to redeem oneself, to improve, and to be a good example of life for others. Paul, mate, I don't think you can ever find a review or a write-up that's going to beat that. I mean, if a DVD cover or a poster could be 2 meters long, you got to slap that thing on there because that's just fantastic. But not only fantastic, but I think it really does hit the crux of what your film does. So I don't know if that's the first time you heard that. I'm sure you maybe heard it before or read it before, but that's just fantastic.
I remember we read that and we were in tears when we got back to Australia. It was just we just couldn't believe that. They got what we were going for. I mean, I couldn't have articulated what we were trying to do, as well as how they summed it up. And I remember, that meant a lot to Chris and it meant a lot to the cast and the crew.
Yeah.
We were a small crew, I basically, I'm a teacher of film. I teach at film schools and stuff. And a lot of some of the crew were former students of mine. And so it was a real tight-knit family, a real wonderful bond. It was created on that set, and so for us, it was more than a movie. You know what I mean? It was just this really special experience to be part of, and to be seeing it travel this far. And we were in Melbourne and got in the top 10 in Melbourne, that blew us away down there. And then we were in St. Louis and then Mexico and all these other places. It was kind of a really amazing response. To what I think is a really important story. I really hope that people get out there and support it and see it.
Well, I thought the film was terrific as well, and I encourage everyone out there listening, Kairos, out today in Australia. Check out your local cinema. Go watch it. It's a fantastic film. It's an important film. And Paul, I thank you very much for your time today. And once again, congratulations with the film.
Thanks, mate. And just a quick one, it's just www.kairosthemovie.com. That's where they'll find links to the cinemas that are showing across Australia.
Excellent. Thank you very much again, Paul.
Thanks again. Thanks. Bye.